Daniel Webster once said, "If all my possessions were taken from me with one exception, I'd choose to keep the power of communication, for with it I would soon regain all the rest." I love that quote. Hello, and welcome to Season 4 of our Parallel Paths, a future for my loved one with a disability and for me. I'm your host, Gerry, Dr. Geralyn Arango Deeley, and this podcast is about just what the title says, the parallel paths of family members and their loved ones with intellectual disabilities. I'm a parent myself, and I always have questions. Our Parallel Paths podcast is about nurturing and supporting ourselves as we nurture and support our loved ones with intellectual disabilities. Our roles as family members are ever-changing and evolving alongside our loved ones. So there's more than one path, more than one future to think about. And that's why we're here. I hope the stories and perspectives of my podcast guests and me give you hope, information, and ideas for your path. So, holy cow, it's been quite a while since my last podcast episode. I feel bad about this gap in episodes because I love scripting the podcast. I love doing interviews with interesting people. And I love bringing our parallel paths to you through Networks for Training and Development, who sponsors our podcast. You know life gets crazy, but shame on me. Back to work. Lots to learn because our needs change, our lives change, and our dreams and our visions evolve. And, like I said, I have questions. So family member, hey, let's talk about speech therapy for our adult loved ones on our parallel paths. Let's talk about communication, helping people get better at it. Our loved ones, certainly, ourselves, and other communication partners in everyday life. And let's talk about it with speech and language pathologist Patrice Gilbert. So my son Nick started speech therapy when he came home from the hospital in 1998. He was about 2 weeks old. 2 weeks old. And so if you've walked the early intervention path, you know that speech services can begin that soon, and that it matters that they do. Speech therapy helps a lot that develops what's needed for eventual speech, but even before that, there are concerns for the baby people, like the ability to suck, get nourishment, to latch on, the ability to have breath strong enough to blow, to have lip closure, and I'm just speaking from memory. I'm not the expert here. And I know I haven't remembered everything that was worked on when Nick's speech therapist visited, but I know that her intense, consistent support was essential to Nick working on expressing what he so wanted to say and to eating and drinking safely as well. I also remember that speech therapists were sometimes hard to find, and we would go for stretches with no one, which made me nervous, and which I documented so we could try to get makeups when someone became available. Because people of all ages can benefit from speech and language therapy, so a speech therapist may have a specialty and maybe somewhere else altogether, like a rehab center or other healthcare providers, or, of course, in educational settings where likely we all found them. Nick got speech therapy services all through school, twice a week, which was more than most people we knew, because Nick had that level of need. Through the years, his IEP goals were to develop expressive language, to expand his MLU, his mean length of utterance, which was to say more, to address developmental apraxia of speech, which, if I remember, was, and our guest will tell us more, was the brain and the mouth not working very well together. And we even tried a communication device, which didn't work out, but it was something that the team tried. And then Nick graduated, and seemingly that was that. He was working, living in the community. He had more going on than I do and still does, so weren't we done? At least until I started to notice that as wonderful as his job is, Nick doesn't have to talk that much at work. I started to notice that people, myself and other family and friends included, were sometimes given to the smile and nod, when we just couldn't understand what Nick wanted to say, and he really did have things to say, I started to notice that though Nick didn't seem to get frustrated when people didn't understand, it almost felt like he was trying less and less to be understood, and that bugged me. I found Patrice Gilbert, our speech-language therapist guest today, on a Facebook page, just by putting the question out there. I had looked at other resources, but what she offered was what I got, and closer to what I wanted for Nick. And so, welcome. A little bit about our guest today, Patrice Gilbert. She's worked as a speech and language pathologist for almost 30 years, specializing in articulation, receptive and expressive language, and auditory processing and memory. And again, if you've had a speech therapist in your life, perhaps these are familiar terms. Patrice has worked in early intervention, in schools, in outpatient facilities and home care. She's certified as an autism spectrum disorder clinical specialist and is a children's book author as well. Plus, she and her 22-year-old daughter are also on the parallel path. So welcome, Patrice Gilbert. Did I forget anything of your credentials?
I don't think so. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you today.
Okay, great.
Talking about speech therapy.
Okay. Because Nick and Patrice started out on Zoom every Friday, which was really convenient for everyone. Because Friday was his day off from work, and it was a great startup because we're kind of seeing if this is working. We set up instructional goals with Patrice, just like back in the IEP team days, and I started to see progress. Nick seemed to have more to say, and we were understanding him better, which is so fun to watch and enjoy and celebrate. And if it feels that good for me, it's got to feel good for Nick. So I wanted to start our chat today with kind of a snapshot from Patrice of speech therapy for adults. What does it look like? And then maybe a little bit about Nick's sessions, but then also to find out about being better communication partners and how we who understand our children, we always say we speak Nick, can coach and support others to be better communication partners too. So I want to start out asking you professionally and personally your philosophy about speech therapy and its value for adults.
So I believe the most important thing is you have to develop a rapport with the person that you're working with, because if they don't trust you and they're not comfortable with you, they're not going to be able to learn from you. So when I say develop a rapport, I don't mean come in and do nothing and just get to know somebody. I start working on goals and documenting what I see that they need help with from the very first time that I meet them. Because I, as a parent, had a lot of people come in and say, oh, we're just going to develop a rapport first. We're not going to really work on anything. And I try to explain it doesn't work like that. You have to come in with the expectation of what she's going to do with you when you're here. You can't start with nothing and then think you're going to be able to build from that. The
developing rapport is very very intentional.
Yes.
It's not like endless chit-chat. You're gathering information even as you're building the rapport.
Right. And actually working on goals as well. They just don't know it because it's the specific questions that I ask or the game that we play. Mm-hmm. I choose things that will give me information and help the adult who I'm working with.
So where do you generate the goals for an adult? Is it different in any way?
It isn't really different. They might not have a current evaluation that I can look at. But I talk with the parents, the people who work with the adult, and I talk with the adult themselves and just figure out, a plan, sort of like an informal assessment. So just gather information and talk with the people and figure out what are their needs. How are they not able to communicate during the day? And what can we do to help them?
Yeah, okay. And
so also presuming competence, having high expectations, making the sessions individualized, and making them fun. Nobody wants to sit there and just drill. Like Nick doesn't like to, he needs to work on specific sounds, but I can't just give him a list of words that start with an L and say, we're going to do these now. I tried. It didn't work. So
that's okay. You tried and it didn't work. So you
Right.
don't say, well, you know what? He can't do that.
Right.
You keep drilling in and looking for the answers.
we just work on it on words that matter to him. So when we're having conversation, if he doesn't use a sound correctly, I will model the word for him, emphasize the sound. He also benefits from hand signals or arm movements to help with the sound. So
I was going to
we'll
say,
do that.
as soon as you said that, I was thinking about one of his favorite terms as a Philly boy, outside of Philly boy, about the Eagles. And so he's always talking about the Eagles, but not everybody knows how many sounds are in the word Eagles. And Patrice was using a physical cue that Nick has picked up and gets a big kick out of doing.
Right.
And we can't sort of show it to you, but it is involving his hands going where they need to be to remember to say the G in Eagles.
Right. So we start with our arms out at the side like we're flying like the eagles, and then bring our right hand in like to our throat for the G sound, and we just say Eagles. And yesterday when I saw him, I got tears, and I'm getting tears now because it makes me so happy when the people I work with are able to use the strategies that I teach them. So yesterday he used that strategy of the arm movements on his own, said Eagles perfectly more than one time. And so now when he's talking about the Eagles, everybody will be able to know what he's saying. Because I didn't even know what he was saying initially, but I knew what we were talking about. So just helping him be able to communicate better is going to help him just across the board in his life. And it just makes me so happy that he's starting to use the strategies independently.
And he certainly gets a kick out of it. One of our other goals was to get him to not call you Treese. And so he will very proudly make a point of saying
He does.
Treese. It's a little slow, but it's there.
Yeah.
So what are all those things called in speech pathologist terms? Because I'm thinking about what areas of need do you address in adults, and I suppose, is it anything necessarily different, or what are the terms we are still using as parents of adults?
So it really isn't that different. A lot of adults might have the same difficulties they had when they were children. So like with Nick, we're working on articulation still and his intelligibility so that everybody can understand him. We're working on receptive and expressive language, which I also do with children who I work with, but adults still could have trouble with that too. The auditory processing piece.
And that's really about practice, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Because although it may be challenged, it's if you never have to really think about it, you're not going to get any better at it or even maintain your skills. And that's the distressing part for a parent, is watching the gains disappear.
Right. And we don't want that. And I don't really believe they actually disappear.
Okay.
Or that a person regresses. I think that they're just not with people anymore who are expecting maybe what the therapist was expecting. So if somebody knows that they can get away with just saying a couple words, like a telegram, instead of using a whole sentence, like we're humans, everybody's going to take the easiest path, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I remember my brother long ago, who's very frank and always has a comment to add to the situation, and it was a real one. He sort of said, I noticed that you guys explain everything. Nick will say a word and everybody else translates for him. And
Right.
It's good and it's bad, because he's understood, but he's not. I'm doing all the work, his sister's doing all the work, his dad's doing all the work.
Right.
And he's getting the message across, but there's no growth there for him.
Right. So that's why speech therapy in adults can be helpful, because we're not always going to be there to translate for our children. So we want them to be able to be intelligible to anybody who's listening. We don't want to have to translate And they don't probably want us to translate. I mean, they're adults now, and
Yeah.
how would you feel if somebody had to
Yeah.
reiterate what you were saying or let somebody know what you were saying?
All the time.
So, right.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
so often with the challenges, I think, how would it feel to be, or how would it feel if I had to do whatever?
Right.
Wouldn't I want to yell at somebody who just wasn't trying to understand what I was going to say? Like, here, I'm trying
Right.
to tell you know.
Right.
We know what that feels like as typical folk. And so, the
Right.
smile and a nod, people think, well, at least he's, I'm trying to be polite, but it's like, can we do better?
Right.
And so the other piece of this is that you communicate with the person on the other side of it. Communication's always a two-way street. And so those of us, in my case, who speak Nick, we still struggle. But how can we become better communication partners? And how can we model for others? Because
Right.
I think people are well-intended, but
I think so.
they get to a point where I don't know what he's saying.
Right.
Or somebody says, oh, how old is he? And he's standing right there.
Right.
And it's like, ask him.
So talk directly to him.
So
Right.
what are some thoughts about that?
So I think about what you're doing and what you're saying, and would you like it if somebody was doing or saying that to you?
Yeah.
So
always.
that's what I tell people. So I think that training staff and adults who interact with the person is really important to let them know the strategies we're using in speech therapy that help. And just to explain to people how the person communicates, what helps them, what doesn't help them, and what they can do. If you're talking with someone, anyone, and you don't understand what they're saying, what do you do?
Yeah.
Do you nod and smile and act like you know? Or do you say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Will you say it again, please? It's the same with a person with disabilities. They're humans first, just like everybody. So just, ask them to repeat it. If you still don't understand it, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. Is it okay if I ask your mom? Or is it okay if I ask your job coach? Is it okay if I ask the other adult who's with you if they know what you said?
That's cool, because what that's saying is, if I'm really at a point where I don't get it or I need more than you're giving me, may I? I'm not turning away from you. I'm asking you for permission
Right.
to get more information.
Right.
And that's important because it still gives a person a little sense of, okay, yes, you may. Or,
Right.
whatever
Right.
they respond.
Right.
How respectful.
Because, we want them to know that we do respect them. And we're not just going to say, well, I don't understand you. I'm just going to talk to this other person instead. Because nobody would like that. Made me sad to even say. Nobody wants that. So ask for more information. Ask them specific questions. Don't pretend to understand what they're saying if you really don't. It's okay to let somebody know, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And sometimes I think about the fact that I have a good number of people who are my staff, or Nick's staff, sorry, and they have things to tell us. And so, we have our service notes and things like that that are helpful to that process. But when I can catch up with a staff in person, sometimes they're seeing things that I don't see, or that, for good and for bad. Because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, Nick was so great about, taking care of something out in the community. And it's like, yay, that's the good news. Or sometimes, wow,
Right.
he really struggled with. So that's the other piece, is to let people be our partners, I think, too.
Right.
To say, hey, so how's it going for you? When you go to the supermarket with him, is he talking? Is he greeting people? Is he doing whatever?
Right.
Because I notice it too. Wednesday is half-price sushi day at Giant.
Yeah.
And
Oh, is that why he talks about sushi on
because
Wednesdays?
right before he sees you, he's had sushi.
That's too funny. I didn't know that. See?
Yep, but I try to kind of step back and watch the whole process.
Yes.
He'll, it's like really cool that he does greet the person who's paying. He does, when they chit-chat with him, he chit-chats back in his way. And when they say, oh, have a good day, he's like, hey, you too. You know, and it's like, that's what people do.
Right.
And those natural circumstances, that's when I should step back. And if he does mess it up or something or forget something, I'm there. Or your staff is there. But it's like, you know what? Here's that presuming competence.
Exactly.
Yeah. Of saying, you know what? He could probably do this. And,
Right.
you know, he's still going to, the main idea here is to get the sushi. But it's also to say hi and to say thank you and have a good day and all that.
Right.
And he got his sushi, so it's rewarding in that way.
Yeah.
But we're presuming the competence when I do try to step back and sort of asking my staff to find that balance of don't talk for him,
Right.
help him, you know.
Right. See
Do
what
with
he
him.
can do.
Yeah.
Just let him do what he's going to do first. And then if he needs help and he says it's okay for you to help,
I like that piece. That's
then
important.
you can help.
Yes. Yes. Do you mind if I answer this question for you, Nick? You know, because the other piece of it is you don't want to embarrass somebody, and
Right.
and that's also a piece that leads to someone's frustration. You know, everything that I think we do is to also keep people from getting frustrated. Because I know when I get frustrated, I get kind of cussy. You know,
Right.
I'm not going to break anything, but I'm going to get like, "Arr." And so.
Yeah, our language isn't as acceptable when we're angry sometimes.
Yeah,
Just
you know.
like, with
Right.
anybody.
Right. And we have to realize that sometimes people with disabilities are already, stigmatized by the people who don't have to think about this stuff and who may really
Right.
assume, like, you know what they're like. And it's like, no, you don't know what they're like because there's no
Right.
they.
Right?
So,
Everybody's an individual.
yeah.
That's why everything is individualized for them to help them succeed.
And that we can help support them in different ways as communication partners to work on their articulation and all the speech pathologist kinds of areas that I need to say to you, like, how's it going? What should I be looking for or working on? And that
Right.
if it's not a good fit, you are free to move on. Somebody did mention that to me, and I thought, well, if when the day Nick says he doesn't want to do this anymore, then we'll revisit it.
Right.
Right now, he is quite enjoying the experience, and I think he really is showing improvement and more intentionality in what he wants to say, and he's pretty funny, so that's kind of nice too.
Yeah, I agree. He's shown a lot of progress. When I first started working with Nick, just attention to task and focusing on what my goals were was a challenge. He likes to talk about what he likes to talk about.
Elvis and hair.
Yes. Yes.
Time in the out, Nick. Sorry about that.
And, and sports.
Eagles.
But he has significantly increased his attention to task. He needs less redirection when we're doing the activities. I think some of that is because I adapted, and if what I was doing wasn't working, then he likes to be social. So we do a lot of conversation, but it's specific conversation. So he can talk about what he wants to order from Pat's Pizza, or he can talk about camp, but then I have specific questions that I'm asking him to target certain sounds or to see if he'll answer a certain type of question. So even though to somebody who doesn't understand what the therapeutic activities are, it might look like, oh, they're just talking, they're not doing speech therapy, oh, they're just playing a game, they're not, she's not really working on anything. With me, that is never true.
It's always intentional.
Because I'm always working on something, even if we're just having a conversation. They're benefiting from learning how to have a give and take conversation. Nick went from just talking about his thing and me trying to interject and not being successful to now he asks me questions.
And others
also,
too. Others
like,
too.
what
That's
do
so
you
cool.
like to eat? What are you going to do tonight?
Yep.
And he's asking me the questions that I was asking him. So modeling is huge.
Yeah.
So just having those conversations and modeling the language that the person should be using or could be using. And one day they will. That's just what I always tell people. I know.
Yeah, I mean, he is asking other people.
That's great.
Questions that are just not like, here's what I'm doing today. It's like, no, how are you? What's going on? You know, he'll ask other people and create conversation, and that gets me all happy.
Me too.
And it's a work in progress all the time, and, you know, regression is real, but it's like, you know what? Here we are, and we're doing something.
Right.
And, you know, his job isn't the talkiest job. They're lovely, but he doesn't really have to, he's not really front facing in a place where pretty much almost no one's totally front facing.
Right.
So where are the other opportunities? With friends, at his classes, at stuff like that. And it's like, well, then let's talk about it, using it there.
Right.
And saying to your boxing coach, hey, how are you doing tonight?
Right.
What are we doing tonight? Stuff like that. That's just, conversation's a two-way street, Nick.
Right.
And you're practicing, but you're taking it out there, because the generalizing is the challenge.
And he started generalizing on his own.
Yeah.
Which is super exciting.
He's got communicative intent.
Definitely.
Tons and tons.
Definitely.
The other thing I wanted to sort of say, we're just touching on now, which was kind of fun, is that Nick texts some strange things. And so it was something that we're starting to work on, which is using his texting feature, his speech to text, and he's really motivated to talk into his phone. He's really motivated to talk into the creepy Alexa thing we have, and it's because it is creepy. I think it's watching us, but he's motivated, and so you're starting to work with him like a bit on his phone to say, you know, text speech to text the message, and let's see if it comes out, and you can press the actual message and get it spoken back so you can hear it.
Right.
But that, to be understood in that way, is something really that is something to run with for him, because he wants it.
Yeah, that's important to him. So he'll be motivated to work on his speech intelligibility, and he'll be motivated to work on the sounds that he needs to produce so that the speech to text thing can understand what he's saying. Because I think the problem is it doesn't understand what he's saying, because he doesn't say the words as clearly as we do.
Right.
But that's why you don't have to sit and drill. If you can make it functional and important to the person, then the intrinsic motivation comes into play, and it's so exciting to see that too. It'll be great.
So what have I forgotten? What would you want to add? Because I think my question, I know money. How does this get paid for? We started out private pay, and not my preferred way to go, but I really wanted what I wanted for him. And when I saw him working with you, I was like, he wants this too. This seems like a good match. We want to pay for it. That's all. And then we got interesting again. So how does somebody acquire these services as an adult?
So it is challenging. It's more challenging to find services for an adult with learning disabilities who still needs help with their language and all of these things. So, reaching out in Facebook groups, talking to people in the community, private pay is one way to go. Finding a place that will take insurance is another, but again, that's hard to find. Yeah. For our kids, waiver funding.
That's how we ended up.
So, yes.
Doing this.
And then I've had people apply for grants before too.
Wow.
It covers a certain number of sessions, but it's better than nothing.
Sure.
And it helps the parents out financially.
Okay, because that's the other piece of this is, how do I do this? And how do I pay for it? So it's an open-ended question, but it's definitely one to ask. Not to say, well, he's not in school anymore, so I guess you can't get speech therapy. It's like, well, you may have to call your insurance company. You may have to put something out on Facebook,
Right. But, and we can figure out a solution.
Right.
I know a lot of people want speech therapy for their child, but they can't find a place that takes their insurance, and they can't afford to private pay. And, if they're still school age, you can always talk with the school. Right. And see if they'll help in any way.
Right.
So just use whatever resources you have available to you.
Yeah, keep plugging away at it, because that's,
Right.
you know, we ended up using our waiver, and that was great, but it wasn't a slam dunk. It was a bit of like, all right, how do we do this? And so using our supports coordinator and using you, and we were able to make it happen, but it was not a slam dunk. It took some work, but so worth it. So worth it. What
Right.
else? Did I forget anything?
I think, one thing I would like to address is the whole assessment piece.
Okay.
Because I've talked with quite a few parents who their child is struggling at school. They know that something's wrong. They do the school does an evaluation and says they're fine, but the parent knows they're not fine. So if that is happening to you, it could mean that the proper assessment tool wasn't used to show the difficulty that your child is having. It could just mean the assessment they used is what your child's strengths are, but it did not show what their needs are.
Yeah.
So, the parents are right. If they think their child is struggling, then the child is struggling. So I've talked with parents and listened to them say what difficulties their child was having, read the report, saw what evaluation tools were used, and I said, from what you're describing, these evaluation tools aren't going to show what you're talking about. I make recommendations about, you might want to ask for these specific tests.
Okay.
And it has never failed. They ask for those tests, they get done, and then the parents are like, thank you so much. Now we know where the areas of need are and how we can help him.
Because we still have to remember that, parents are experts on their children.
Right.
And that everybody else is a member of the team, and the child is the ultimate expert on themselves. But we are not to discount the fact that, families and schools have things to offer one another.
Right,
and
definitely.
It needs to be respected on both ends.
Yes.
And so,
And reach out. Like, parents, don't be afraid to reach out for help. Don't be afraid to ask whoever you can for help. The worst that happens is you end off where you were and you don't have the help. But if you don't ask, you don't know.
Yeah.
So I ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, me too. That's why you're here, and I'm so glad you're here. Anything
Thank
else?
you. I am happy to be here. I think I just want to reiterate presume competence, high expectations.
Yep.
I come in, and whatever the ultimate goal is, I start at the top and then work our way back to see how much help does the person actually need. As opposed to a lot of people who give the max cues to start, but then you can't know what a person really can do on their own. So high expectations. Here's what I want you to do. Let's see how you can do it.
All right.
And then if you need some help, I'll give it to you to get you up to that point. And for those just want to maybe define presume competence, that just means assume that children can learn or adults can learn. We all learn throughout our whole life. Yes. So they can't learn what they're not exposed to. They can't learn what they're not taught. Yep. So I think it is just really important to presume competence. High expectations, believe in their potential to meet their goals and support them in getting there. And the individualized attention and develop that rapport. If you don't have that rapport and they're not comfortable with you, it won't be successful. And that, it doesn't mean you're a bad therapist. It doesn't mean, that the child can't be helped. It just means it's not the right person. Because you have to be comfortable with anybody. That's how we choose our friends.
I was going to say, that's kind of a life thing, isn't
it?
Right. Don't gravitate toward people you're not comfortable with.
Right.
And that goes in this professional, developmental setting as well. And so, much good stuff. So much good stuff. I'm so glad you were here today.
Thank you. Me too.
Yay. Yay. And you, listeners, thanks so much for spending time with us on today's episode with speech-language pathologist Patrice Gilbert on our parallel paths. Speech therapy is for adults with intellectual disabilities too, for all the reasons Patrice shared and all the philosophy that Patrice shared that makes it a good experience. And hopefully some of you have experienced all of these good things on your own. Speech therapy for Nick has really been very helpful all through, and even as an adult. And I do think it's enhancing his communication. He has a lot to say. And I hope today you found some information you can use on your path. And listeners, I hope you'll follow our podcast. I hope you'll share it with family and friends. And I really hope you'll return to listen and learn from more stories of people like you and me and our loved one with an intellectual disability on our parallel paths. You're not alone. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to comment, to rate the podcast, and to join our Facebook group. I will see you next time. Take care.